Hi, Andrew Pollock here. Today we're going to talk about pendants. Pendants are kind of the next logical progression in what we've been doing, starting with beads wound on a mandrel. We're now going to work our way off the mandrel and to working right off the end of a piece of solid rod. Pendants are a great place to start that, and they also allow us to talk about things like the lens and magnification and how to do a punty and punty transfer. But since we started with beads, we're going to continue with beads, and we're going to make some pendants with frit. Frit is just granules of glass, crushed glass of different sizes, and I like to use different size frit in my beads. We're also going to use fine powdered glass, which is the finest of frits. It's powder. So let's get started. First thing you want to do is heat up a piece of clear glass. You can do these on any torch. I'm using 12mm clear rod here. If you're using a smaller torch, you may want to start a little bit smaller, and if you're using a bigger torch, you can start about this size or even get a little bit bigger. But remember, they do get heavy the bigger you get. So we want to fit as much detail into a small area as we can here, and use the clear glass that's left to magnify what we've put in there and make your pattern appear larger. So the first way to do this is just to make a gather. You want to gather up a ball of glass about the size that you want your final pendant to be. You want to do all of this work now so that you don't have to gather up extra glass later. It makes for less work down the line. If you want to speed up the process, you can turn your torch up a little bit. Notice how I have ever so slight of a tilt in the rod. I'm tilting it ever so slightly downward. Letting that glass fall back and gather into itself. Once you have your gather about the size you want for your final pendant, you want to come out of the flame and let it cool down for a minute. You can take your time as you press straight up and down to form what's called a Maria. You don't want to push as hard as you can. We're not trying to push the rod down into the table. I just want to create one flat side and one domed side. This domed side will be the final lens. I will remove my clear rod and it will reveal what's inside. So now I want to get the face of my gather hot, where I press down onto my graphite pad. And these little stainless steel carafes are great. I get them at the grocery store or at your local cooking store. You can find them, in addition to the gravy boats, which are another great tool for containing and holding and adding frit. Stainless steel is the best material if you can find it. So get that hot and pushing gently and turning to coat it evenly, but being very careful not to push it off center. So I'm not pushing hard. And then ideally you can just use heat and rotation to melt this in. At this point, my glass rod of clear is perfectly horizontal to the table, parallel with the table, and perpendicular to the torch. And I just want to melt all that in and then redefine my Maria, so that it has one flat side and one domed side. If you want, you can add multiple layers of color. This is a green that is kind of complementary to this green mix that I started with. You can use any color to do this. Doesn't take a lot of frit to do this. So like I said, you can use heat and just rotation and patience to melt it all the way in. Or you can speed up the process a little bit by paddling or marvering it. Realize that also slows things down as it sucks heat out of the glass. So it's a balance. I use a combination of the two. And then melt it in and redefine your Maria. Now there's a number of ways to back your pendant. Generally, we want to put a backing of color on the pendant to hide what we've done. The easiest way is to use powdered glass. This is just a black powder. And I'm just dabbing it in there very gently, being careful not to tilt it too much because I want it to stay on the back. I don't want it to come over onto the front, onto the lens. Now there is no true black. They're all just very dark shades of blues or greens or reds or browns. So in order to have the black look black, you need to do a couple of coats, especially with a powder. Generally I do 2 to 3 coats. Sometimes I do more, depending on the color that I'm using or the amount of clear. All those things will dilute your color. I think I'll go 4 just for good measure. And put that aside somewhere that you're not going to knock it over. Melt this in. And again, redefine. So now you need a rod of clear. You're going to need probably 2 rods of clear, 6 to 7 millimeter. This first rod, I'm going to get the tip hot, and I'm going to touch it right to the center of my back, kind of giving a turn while it's still hot to help me straighten it up. You want it to be perfectly on center. And then I heat my clear rod and remove it from my original handle. Get it hot, and then pull. Set that down somewhere out of the way where you're not going to pick it up or burn yourself. And then melt the top half your lens round. There's many different types of lenses. Today we're going for a convex lens. That'll give you the cleanest magnification and is the best practice of this technique. Eventually you can get into concave lenses or other magnifications. If it starts to flop around on your handle, use this 90-degree edge of your paddle to chill that and keep it straight. Let's let it cool down and look at it. Right now it's glowing hot and it's hard to see, but as it cools you'll be able to see the random dot pattern that gets created. Okay, so now you need a second handle or punty. You want to make sure it's got a nice and kind of clean, straight tip. And you want to get it hot. Pick your top and your bottom and touch it to what will be the bottom. It doesn't really matter with these Frit pendants. And then you want to tap the one that's going to be removed. What happens is the vibrations go down the handle and it breaks at the weakest point, which is where you attached it. So oftentimes there's a little mark left and I will quickly heat that and it removes it. We'll have to do that also when we remove it from the final handle. So now we have a cabochon. We have a daub of glass with the lens with our Frit and backing on the back side. So to do your hook, get the rod of glass hot and glowing that you want to attach to become your hook, and get the top of the bead good and hot. Touch them together and let them fuse together. You want them to be very hot, almost white hot. Then go and heat enough glass for the length and the thickness you want your hook. For the size you want your hook, you need to heat up enough material. This rod is fairly thick for a little hook, so I'm pulling it out longer and thinner to become my hook. And I'm just holding it while it freezes. And then I want to heat it where I want to cut it off to that length, a little bit longer than I think I'll need because it's easier to remove glass than to add glass. And then go and get the entirety of that length evenly hot and tap, 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 or with your tweezers, very gently, push it into place. You want to put it where it's almost touching but not, and give your piece a good flash. Then you want to heat the two pieces that are going to meet. Get them glowing hot, just like your original attachment, and push them together. Push them enough that it bulges out a little bit there, and then pull apart a little bit, and that bulge will even out. And that's how you do a hook. If you want to be a perfectionist about it, you can take your graphite reamer tool and you can round it out. But I like the look of what we call a shepherd's hook. As you round it out more and more, it looks less and less handmade. And we don't want them to look machine-made. You can also use your reamer to straighten it. I like to check it from multiple angles because sometimes it can look straight from one side, but it's not from the other. So take a second to look at your hook, make sure you're happy with it, straighten it out, but don't spend too long on it. Then you want to flash your tweezers. You never want to touch hot glass with a cold tool. It will shock it. And then polish that little mark that was left behind, if there is one. And then into the kiln at 1050 degrees it goes. All right, I'd like to do that one more time for review and to show you something a little bit different in that. But I'm going to keep this simple. We're just going to do simple Frit pendants. This is how I do my very detailed aquarium pendants, and even how we start larger things like marbles and things of that nature. But I want to keep it simple for you to begin with. Think of this as an exercise that you can easily make an item with that you could sell or give away for friends, for your bartender, or for stocking stuffers, or whatever you can think of. So step one, gather up a ball of glass about the size you want your lens to be. If you want to make it bigger, just take the time to gather it up, or start with a slightly larger piece of glass. As you get better at this, you will be able to combine steps. So instead of creating my Maria first, so that I can see how big it is and take my time with it, I'm going to make my Maria as I put my first layer of Frit on. So make yourself a ball, and then flatten it into your Maria while picking up some Frit. And just the same, heat it up, melt it in, and reflatten it. To maintain that original shape. Okay? So then let it cool down for a minute. And now I'm going to back it, but instead of using my powder, I'm just going to use a rod of glass. So I want to let this cool down so that it's stiff, so that it will receive my backing color, which will be molten. Oftentimes I start by putting a dot of that color right in the middle, just so I know where my pattern ends. But also because when I finish, I don't have to go all the way to the center now. And sometimes that last little bit, when going to the center, can trap a little bit of air. So now I kind of eliminated that problem. So I want to heat the tip of my color, and I want to start by laying a nice straight line on right on the edge of the bead, right only as far as the color goes up the side of the bead. I don't want to lay it on too thick, so I want it good and hot. And I just start with that. Sometimes I'll continue to coil into the middle at this point, but oftentimes I like to just stop, look at it, make sure it's straight, and then continue. This is a pretty amber color, but it will go more opaque once I heat it and run it through the kiln. So now I spiral it all the way, almost to the center. You end up with a little hole in the center. It's going to be hard to see maybe as it cools down. And if I was to continue to spiral all the way to the center, that's where I would trap a little air bubble. So by having already put a little bit of color there in the center, now I've got color there and no air bubble. That's one of the secrets. It is also not the only way to do this. When I'm making a lot of them, I do love using a good powder, and there's nothing wrong with it. It achieves the same thing, but it's quicker. You can also push that color to the middle, and that will push any air out so that you don't trap air. So there are a number of ways of doing this. I don't want you to think that my way is the only way. Sometimes you'll see me do other ways. There's sometimes that whatever it is you may be working on calls for doing it one way versus the other way for whatever reason. So add them all to your bag of tricks and reflatten and reestablish. And if you remember, I said you want to get that original lens to about the size you want your final bead, because it does get a little bit bigger if you're adding a backing and you add it on there thick, or you're adding multiple layers of Frit. Even those little granules of glass do add a little bit at a time to it. But either way, we're where we were with our other one. So now we have to punty to the back. This is the easier of the two punties. This is the one that will crack off first in the punty transfer. So you don't want to weld it to your piece. You don't want both of these to be glowing the same color. That is a hot seal or a good welded piece. You want what we call a cold seal. So you want, this one's already hot because it's been in the torch for a while. I want to get my punty hot, and the hot glass will stick to the warm glass, and it's that heat differential that makes for a bad weld, which is what we want. So it will crack off, and then remove your clear handle. And all this time you can't even see what's going on in there. You have to trust that your pattern looks good. It's random, so it doesn't really matter, but it's kind of fun. It's kind of like Christmas once you round it out and reveals what's in there. You can kind of see into it from the edge, kind of peeking. Another little trick, if you are making a lot of them and you just want to speed your process up a little bit, a marble mold's a great tool for making these round, for getting all the domes the same curvature and or height. If it starts to flop around, because these guys are squat, you are walking the line of your handle is right there. You can use your paddle to chill it to keep it from flopping around, that 90-degree edge. But you can also use the marble mold for just speeding up the process of getting all those domes the same. Rounding it out, smoothing it out. And again, walking the line, it's starting to flop, so I just kind of very gently, not pushing, use the edge of my paddle. Now we want to let it cool down. Okay, so now for the punty transfer. This is the hardest part, guys. So, get your next one hot. Pick your top and your bottom and touch it to it. And while this one is still molten, give it a tap. A nice firm tap. Don't hold it as tight as you can. You want the vibrations to go down the rod and be absorbed by that weakest point and create a fracture there. So then the last step is to attach our hook. This one I'm going to do a little bit differently too. I'm going to attach it to the top by getting both pieces glowing. Then I want to get enough hot for the length and the thickness I want my hook. And then I'm going to flatten it. And I very slowly pull it out. And instead of the other one that I manually looped over, I pull this one out towards the front, tilt it back over towards the back, and start pushing it down until I can touch down where I want it to end, and heating where I want it to disconnect, pull away. If there's any excess material there, you can remove it, but you just want to go back over that weld, and if you want to round it out, you can. And then the last step, flash your tweezers, grab it by the hook, and a little tap. And into the kiln.